Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, my fine ladies and gentlemen. I'm back from the mire of procrastination, and I'm finally getting off of my rear end to actually make something productive once in a while. I got something a little bit special for you all, and no, it's not a review. If you guys have been following me on Twitter and mostly on Facebook, due to some movies that were supposed to be released until next week, like Tenet being pushed back thanks to the Voldemort virus, I've decided to do something a little bit special for you all this time. I came up with the idea of making a poll between two different movie ideas that I really wanted to work so desperately hard on. One of which was the top 10 movies that define who I am, whether as a film fan or just as a person overall. And the other, of course, was an entire Blu-ray collection video. And so the results are in, and judging by the title of this video, you're getting exactly what you voted for. An entire Blu-ray collection video from yours truly. But just because I'm going to be doing an entire Blu-ray collection video does not mean I'm not going to do my 10 or 15 movies that define who I am. I am still working on the project and the script for it as we speak, so brace yourself for that video to come sometime soon. And by that I don't mean like a year, just until it's ready. Now before we get started on this entire Blu-ray collection video that I have, I want to let you guys know that I have been collecting Blu-rays since Christmas of 2013. So basically, almost 7 years of Blu-ray hunting. And also, because of my entire passion of collecting so many Blu-rays, I have been mostly inspired by two channels that made this entire video possible. That would be John Flickinger, aka The Flick Pick, and Wasting Money 1. Both of those channels will be linked in the description box, so please check them out as soon as you can. And also, be advised, this is going to be an incredibly long video, so in case you want to skim between the sections and you want to see like a particular film that I could possibly have in my collection, there will be a timestamp table of contents for every single movie that begins with a number or beginning letter of the alphabet. And the same will go for different sections of the video like collections and the Steelbooks that I have. Or if you want to treat this video like an audiobook and you just want to hear what I have, whether you're playing video games or reading a book, knock yourselves out. And as for the rest of you all, sit back, relax, and let the Blu-ray collection video begin. Alright, so to start off with this Blu-ray collection video, we're going to start off with 10 Cloverfield Lane. Now, this is a very solid suspense film that somehow manages to tie itself into the Cloverfield universe. And Dan Trachtenberg, who also worked on this movie, directed a few episodes of The Boys, which is a show that I love on Amazon Prime. So please do yourself a favor, watch The Boys on Amazon Prime, and also watch 10 Cloverfield Lane. Next up, we have 12 Angry Men on the Criterion Collection. And if there's anything I can really say about this movie, I would have to say that this movie I would describe as an objectively perfect movie. There are little to zero flaws within this film. If you are a filmmaker and you want to know how to make a great courtroom drama, learn from 12 Angry Men. 127 Hours, directed by Danny Boyle, who was responsible for making the movie Slumdog Millionaire. I have not seen this movie yet, but the only thing I heard from it is that James Franco delivers one of the best performances of his entire career, so I'll definitely come around and check this movie out. Now, if you haven't seen my best movies of 2019 video, 1917 was my favorite movie of the entire year. I love this movie pretty much on every conceivable level, from the acting to the cinematography, which is so flawless because you can tell based on the behind-the-scenes footage how much careful consistency that they had to make every single frame perfect and concise, feeling like an entire day has gone by. By all means, if you have to see a war movie that isn't Dunkirk or Hacksaw Ridge, please go and watch 1917. 28 days later, speaking of Danny Boyle, 2001: A Space Odyssey is a groundbreaking achievement in sci-fi ever invented in the 1960s and still holds up to this entire day. Whether you call it boring, whether you call it a masterpiece of the highest order, you still have to acknowledge what kind of a mark that this movie landed in the entire film industry. The 2007 remake of 3:10 to Yuma is simply fantastic and proves that James Mangold can absolutely produce a fantastic Western as he can with other movies like Logan and Ford v Ferrari. 300, one of the only few good movies in Zack Snyder's filmography. I think personally for me, it does highlight a lot of the flaws that I really have with this movie, specifically the fight scenes that are way too over-stylized, going slow-mo, speed up, and slow-mo, looking like a violent music video. But I think on its own terms, I think Zack Snyder, for what he did, really did a significantly good job making a great adaptation of a Frank Miller comic book. 500 Days of Summer, a movie that is directed by Mark Webb, who later on would destroy his entire reputation making the Amazing Spider-Man films. I've seen and loved a lot of animated movies in my life, but nothing will be as great as 9. If you have seen my review of 9 in my channel, please go check it out if you haven't seen it yet. But everything I could possibly explain for this movie is in that review. This movie is my favorite animated movie of all time, bar none. Every single aspect I love about this film from beginning to end, despite it having a 79-minute running time. You like movies about gladiators? You ever seen a grown man naked? Airplane is one of the best spoof movies ever made, if not the best spoof movie. David Zucker, absolute classic. Speaking of favorite animated movies of all time, Aladdin. It's one of my favorite movies growing up as a kid, and I still love it to this day. Robin Williams as a genie, one of the greatest characters that have ever been written and ever been conceived in the entire animated filmmaking industry. But it's a shame that it got remade into a live-action movie. Thank you, Disney, for making every single movie that I loved in my childhood soulless. Now, if you were to hold me at gunpoint to make me decide between two movies, I can definitely say this. Alien is a science fiction horror masterpiece. Definitely a classic made by Ridley Scott, and Aliens is an action movie science fiction masterpiece made by James Cameron. But if I'm being perfectly honest, I would rather watch Alien than Aliens. Don't shoot me. But hey, on its own terms, both of these movies personify the genre that they were in, whether it's from the 70s or the 1980s. The Amazing Spider-Man stands today as one of the most difficult movies I have ever reviewed or have ever wanted to talk about in my life. This movie, like another film like Ad Astra that I reviewed, is a sometimes movie. Sometimes there are aspects of this movie that I really like about Spider-Man. Sometimes there are other aspects that I really hate about this movie, such as the Lizard and Peter Parker as a character, as he is basically inconsistent at every single point. If I ever do a Spider-Man retrospective, or if I ever want to talk about this movie, maybe I want to dive right into how much I really find this difficult to review The Amazing Spider-Man. American Gangster, another Ridley Scott movie that I haven't seen, but I will. American History X, a movie about neo-Nazis that Edward Norton should have won Best Actor for, but he didn't, which is a crying freaking shame as far as I'm concerned. I like to dissect girls. Did you know I'm utterly insane? I mean, American Psycho is one of the best movies I've ever seen. I mean, it works as a horror movie, it works as a character study, especially with Christian Bale delivering his best performance in my opinion. But this movie also works as a dark comedy to an extent. I mean, what other movie can you get that doesn't involve Patrick Bateman killing Paul Allen with an axe while Huey Lewis in the News is playing, or him having sex with hookers while he's flexing his arms in front of the mirror? Seriously guys, this movie is one of my favorite films of all time. This movie's a masterpiece. I can quote this film all day. Please go see American Psycho. Now, speaking of Oscar snubs, this is what pisses me off the most. Apocalypse Now, which is the, 3-disc extended cut. Francis Ford Coppola, during production, almost died making this movie, and yet still, somehow, some way, just before you thought that this movie was going to get scrapped under the rug and destroyed, this movie comes out and becomes one of the best horror films that have ever been made. And yet, it loses to Kramer vs. Kramer, a movie about divorce. Really, Academy? Really? Next up, we have Arrival, a fantastic science fiction movie that is directed by Denis Villeneuve. The assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, I heard was underrated, although that really sparked my curiosity to go see this movie. I haven't seen it yet, but hopefully sometime soon, I will. Next up is Awakenings, a film that features fantastic performances from Robert De Niro and Robin Williams, and is also directed by Penny Marshall, who also made the movie Big. Alright, let's do this. The Avengers, my favorite Marvel movie of all time. Avengers Infinity War, which is a step up from Age of Ultron, that righteous steaming pile. And in terms of my updated thoughts as months have gone by, I prefer Infinity War over Avengers Endgame. Now don't get me wrong, I really like Avengers Endgame. The problem is that there are certain aspects in this movie, especially involving time travel, which is what they invite into the film, that I can really say that are very flawed in terms of that aspect. But as far as I'm concerned, these 3 movies from the Infinity Saga are definitely amazing in their own respective rights. Next up, Baby Driver, a fantastic Edgar Wright movie, and while it may appear that the editing in this movie is pretty gimmicky, hey, it's a gimmick that freaking works. Speaking of movies that Avengers Endgame teasingly dogpiles in terms of time travel, Back to the Future, the entire trilogy set. I haven't seen the 3rd one, I did see the 2nd one, but the first Back to the Future movie is my favorite time travel movie of all time. It's one of the best movies I've ever seen, period, and who can forget the dynamic duo between Marty McFly and Doc Brown? Oh yeah. Bad Lieutenant Protocol New Orleans. This is my favorite Nicolas Cage movie I have ever seen, and much like American Psycho, this movie absolutely delivers as an hysterical comedy. Actually, every single time I watch this movie, I'm laughing my ass off. And yes, it does have a few pacing issues towards the middle section of the movie, but when it gets to a point in this movie where Nicolas Cage steals another dude's girlfriend and is having sex with her in the middle of the street while he has him at gunpoint, and also the fact where he interrogates a woman as he pinched out her oxygen tube, amazing. Now this Blu-ray may not be of interest to you, specifically if you're a sports fan like I am, but Baltimore Ravens Road to Super Bowl 47. This Blu-ray contains all 4 of the playoff games, including the game against the Colts, where it's Ray Lewis's final game at home as a Raven, the game against the Patriots, where they defeat Tom Brady and redeem themselves from 2011's AFC Championship game, the amazing Super Bowl victory that they had, giving it a great send-off to Ray Lewis and Joe Flacco that I support as well. But this Blu-ray also has, hands down, my favorite football game of all time, where the Ravens face off Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos at Mile High at double overtime. Balto is a childhood classic that I also like, and as I grow up, I see more of the flaws in this movie, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't necessarily work, that doesn't necessarily flow well with me. As a kid, I really appreciate this movie, and as far as I'm concerned, as an adult now, I still kind of appreciate it, despite it being the flawed film that it is. I mean, this next movie's okay and all, but am I seriously gonna watch Battle Los Angeles again? I mean, this is a blind buy, but am I really gonna have a repeated viewing of this? Probably not. Robert Zemeckis may not have the best animated movies in the department, but Beowulf is a very solid movie. This movie does have its issues, mainly when it comes to adapting the entire legend of Beowulf himself. But this movie, for what it's worth, especially since this is the unrated cut, definitely delivers on some aspects, including the action sequences when it gets all bloody and stuff. Big is the kind of movie that with the wrong director and the wrong actor can make a disastrous film, but with Penny Marshall at the director's chair and with Tom Hanks acting brilliantly, might I add, it's a timeless classic that never gets old. Larry, have you ever heard of Vietnam? The Big Lebowski, directed by the Coen brothers, is a hilarious comedy, and it has one of my favorite running gags in any movie ever. Now, before you scream the word betrayal at me, I still have not seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure yet. Hey, don't get me wrong, I will watch it at some point along with the next Bill and Ted movie, Bill and Ted Face the Music, but the thing about that movie, I mean, it looks okay, but I don't want it to be the next Dumb and Dumber 2. That's like the worst case scenario possible for it to be. Oh yeah. You know why I watched this movie, right? Uh-huh. It's because of the brilliant performances from Natalie Portman and Mila Kunis and the fantastic direction from Darren Aronofsky. That's why I picked this movie up. Blade 1 and Blade 2, Wesley Snipes is a vampire hunter, how can you go wrong? The original Blade Runner, which took 3 tries to make perfect, but then you have this movie like Blade Runner 2049, which is undeniably one of my favorite films of the entire decade. And it was one of my favorite movies of 2017. It was like my number 2 of that year. Both of these movies are excellent and are masterpieces in their own right, but this movie, gotta say it, it's even better than the original. Blazing Saddles is the kind of movie that cannot get made because of today's political climate. Just can't. But now that it is made in the 1970s, it still holds up as a fantastic comedy by Mel Brooks himself. Next up is The Book of Eli, an underrated Hugh Brothers movie, The Bourne Identity, The Bourne Supremacy, and the best one, The Bourne Ultimatum. I do not have Bourne Legacy or Jason Bourne because those movies were disappointing, to say the least. Braveheart, yes, is historically inaccurate. But was it an amazing movie directed by Mel Gibson that absolutely deserved Best Picture? Yeah. The Breakfast Club, a relatable John Hughes movie made in the 1980s. Bridge of Spies, a fantastic Steven Spielberg biopic about the Cold War, with Tom Hanks and Mark Rylance delivering amazing performances. Now, Scream may have personified the horror satire genre in its time, but Cabin in the Woods just elevated it. And it's also a film directed by Drew Goddard, who not only saved World War Z from total destruction, but I wasn't a particularly huge fan of the Bad Times of the El Royale when it's basically just Quentin Tarantino Pulp Fiction worship, but on its own terms, Cabin in the Woods is an awesome horror satire. Captain America Civil War, one of the best comic book movies ever made, and it's certainly a lot better than that other face-off movie that came out in the exact same year. I'll give you a hint, they both wear capes. Captain Phillips, while it is one of the best films of the decade, still has one of the finest debuts of a supporting actor I've seen from Barkhad Abdi. Absolutely terrific, and Tom Hanks as well. Phenomenal as always. Next up is Carrie, not the remake, but the classic Carrie, based on the Stephen King novel, with Sissy Spacek as the main lead. What happens when you combine two Academy Award-winning actors and an Academy Award-winning director? You get Catch Me If You Can, of course. And much like 12 Angry Men, much like 9, Children of Men is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it's also a film that I would describe as objectively perfect. And I've also made a review for this movie on my YouTube channel, so definitely check it out if you have the time, because Children of Men is an undisputed masterpiece. It's my favorite film of the 2000s, and it's something that is not only underrated, but I think is something that emotionally affects you as you're watching it. One of the best movies I've ever seen. Please go see it. Chinatown, a film made by a director who diddles little girls. Chronicle, which is my favorite found footage movie of all time, and practically my favorite superhero movie. Not Marvel movie, not DC movie, favorite superhero movie. This film exceeds at every single level, making me connect to these three characters, one of which is Dane DeHaan, who delivers the most underrated performance of the entire decade, and an acting debut in Michael B. Jordan, who's also doing a fantastic career for himself. Orson Welles' Citizen Kane is regarded by so many critics, including the AFI, to be the greatest movie of all time. When I get down to watching this movie, we'll see about that. Next up we have Cloverfield, which is a very solid found footage movie and also a very good monster movie, and this movie was directed by Matt Reeves, who went on to do Dawn and War for the Planet of the Apes, which we will get to eventually. Cobra, starring Sylvester Stallone as the great Marion Cobra Cobretti. This movie was recommended to me by one of my favorite YouTube channels, The Rageaholic, and the moment I saw his first episode of The Rageaholic Cinema on this movie, I could not help but to get myself this film. What other action star isn't chewing a matchstick on their lip and holding a submachine gun with a laser on top of it, killing multiple criminals as much as possible? I'll tell you who, it's Sylvester freaking Stallone in this very cheesy, guilty pleasure action movie. You know what the problem is? You're too violent. Collateral, a movie directed by Michael Mann, who also worked on Heat, starring Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx. I still haven't gotten around to see this movie, but in moments time, I'm gonna watch this bad boy. Commando, one of the best action movies that Schwarzenegger has ever made in his entire career. Godlike material. Hey, don't disturb my friend. He's dead tired. Coraline, one of the best stop-motion animated films made by one of my favorite animated companies of all time, Laika. This is their undisputed masterpiece alongside Kubo and the Two Strings. And not just that, as it works as an awesome adaptation of a Neil Gaiman book, but this movie also introduced me to a trailer of a favorite animated movie of mine. So, thank you, Coraline. The Crazies, a tolerable remake starring Timothy Olyphant. Creed, I would say, is one of the best Rocky movies that have ever been made, aside from Rocky 1 and Rocky 2. Not to mention that Creed 2 also serves as a great sequel and a great successor to the original. And, Academy, word of advice, you should have done what the Golden Globes did and make Sylvester Stallone win Best Supporting Actor at the Oscars. Just letting you know. The Crow, made by Alex Proyas, who eventually made Gods of Egypt and proceeded to crap on every single director after that. A Cure for Wellness is not only an underrated movie in its own right, but it's also a movie that is my first public film screening that I have ever seen, and it's also a film that I got to see with my movie reviewing icon, Corey Coleman of Spill.com fame and Double Toasted fame as he is doing currently. Best part is, I also got a selfie with him, so thank you, Cure for Wellness. Thank you. Now, I don't have Batman Begins, but I do have the masterpiece itself in The Dark Knight, and I do have the satisfying yet pretty inconsistent and flawed Dark Knight Rises. Seriously, how did Bruce Wayne survive that blast radius again? I mean, even if you have autopilot, you cannot survive within like 10 seconds of that thing. Dazed and Confused, a Richard Linklater movie. Oh Captain, My Captain. Dead Poet Society is one of my favorite movies of all time, and still, Robin Williams delivering a fantastic performance as usual. I did say before that Deadpool was my favorite superhero movie of 2016. I kind of want to change my mind and I want to put in Captain America Civil War ahead of this movie, but on its own terms, Deadpool is still a great superhero satire that hits all the right notes in every single aspect. And Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool, A+ casting. Death Wish starring Charles Bronson is one of the most underrated movies I've ever seen, unjustly reviled at its time, but still holds up to this day. It is a terrifically underrated film. And even the Bronson Triple Threat trilogy containing Death Wish 2, which is a very good sequel, Death Wish 3, which is my favorite Death Wish, and ultimately one of the best guilty pleasures I've ever seen, and Crackdown 4, which I have yet to see, but whatever you do, don't get Death Wish 5 or the remake of Death Wish. The remake of Death Wish, not even going to speak about it, let's continue on. And for a person who loves the dystopian genre, you're going to hear me say this over and over again, District 9 is one of the best movies that I have ever seen in my entire life. It has one of the best directorial debuts of all time with Neil Blomkamp. That's right, not Neil Marshall, Neil Blomkamp, who directed the heck out of this movie, and Peter Jackson, who is also responsible for Lord of the Rings, also produced this film, and boy, what a film. This movie right here has a budget of $30 million, and the visual effects of this film still look state-of-the-art. Avatar may have the better visual effects, but in terms of scale, in terms of cinematography, in terms of characters, and the themes itself, District 9, one for the money. Martin Scorsese's The Departed, the one that won Best Picture in 2006. I have done everything in my power to avoid the spoilers in this film, but I'll definitely check it out sometime. I can guarantee you that. Before Neil Marshall torched his career with Hellboy 2019, he made my favorite horror movie of all time, The Descent. An all-female cast about these group of women going on vacation to a cave, and little do they know that there are underground cave crawlers that lurk beneath that tried to tear them apart and kill them all. It's one of the best horror movies I've ever seen. Barna, I tried to get past 20 minutes of this movie, and by the time it gets to the 20-minute mark, I'm like, I'm not watching this movie. Hey brothers, you wanna go see this movie with me? I had to get reinforcements, and by the time the movie was over, my brothers loved it, and so did I. Yeah, Dracula Untold, it's fine. It's pretty and fantastically stupid, especially the part where the film jumps the shark and the Sultan goes, "Man cannot fear what they cannot see," and he decides to blindfold the entire Persian army. If that is not stupid by any stretch, I don't know what it is with Dracula Untold. But I mean, hey, the film at least has Tywin Lannister in it, so that's a plus. Drive, a film I have yet to see, directed by Nicholas Winding Refn. And following that, we have another Christopher Nolan movie, Dunkirk, starring Harry Styles. Apparently. But in all legitimacy, this is a tremendous war film, like I said, with 1917. Not one of the best films that Christopher Nolan has made in his entire filmography, but I cannot deny the fact of how well edited it is and how interesting the storytelling technique of going at 3 different perspectives, one by land, one by air, one by sea, all within a single film, and it's pretty interesting and something we haven't seen in any war movies before. And despite it not being one of Christopher Nolan's best work, it still manages to land in one of my top 10 films of 2017. Next up, the action equivalent of Groundhog Day, Edge of Tomorrow, Live, Die, Repeat, whatever you call it. It's crazy how overlooked and underrated that this film is. This is one of the most unique action thrillers that we have seen in the past decade, but it's unfortunate that this film bombed on its theatrical run. So by all means, I beg of you to go see Edge of Tomorrow. Or Live, Die, Repeat, whatever. Jon Favreau's Elf is one of my favorite Christmas movies that I have ever seen. It's extremely quotable, and as of right now, it stands as a Christmas classic. And if you don't see this movie, You must be a South Pole elf. Now I bring to you the Blu-ray disc that started the entire collection, that started it all, with Neil Blomkamp's Elysium. This is the very first Blu-ray disc I've ever owned. I got it on Christmas, and this movie is not as much of a masterpiece as Neil Blomkamp's previous movie, District 9. Some of the political messages in this movie involving healthcare, poverty, class disparity, it's all very heavy-handed and kind of too obvious, and it's kind of like, okay, we get it. These things are something that we have to fix in our society. But this movie absolutely does deliver on all fronts when it comes to being an action sci-fi thriller, and I think in my book it's pretty underrated. End of Watch, which is directed by David Ayer before he made the abominable Suicide Squad. And also, speaking of underrated, Equilibrium. If you love movies like Fahrenheit 451 or 1984 with the Big Brother is watching you thing, go see Equilibrium. This movie takes place in a distant future where humanity has outlawed everything that has to trigger the emotion in order to maintain peace, such as books, art, music. And while this movie definitely at its time was being ragged on for being a Matrix wannabe, because judging by the action scenes, it practically is, it still sells as an exceptional action movie, with Christian Bale delivering a powerhouse performance. Next up we have Ex Machina, a film that is also made by the director Alex Garland, who did Annihilation, a film I found very interesting, but this is like his, I think, directorial debut if I'm not mistaken, but I haven't seen this film yet. I really am looking forward to it, so I hope it's good. You know, I can eat a peach for hours. John Woo's Face Off is a blast. John Travolta, Nicolas Cage overacting each other. What more is there to say? Fantastic Mr. Fox is another stop-motion animated film that came out at the exact same year as Coraline, and this is one of my favorite stop-motion animated films that I have ever seen, and this is yet another prime example of how Wes Anderson can not only make a great adaptation of a Roald Dahl book, but this shows just how capable he is at being an exceptionally good animated film director. If he ever makes another animated movie alongside Isle of Dogs, I can't wait. Next up, we have another John Hughes movie in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. This movie is centered around a high school senior who pretends to be sick on a particular day, and then he skips one day of class or one day of school just by having the time of his life with his friends, going throughout Chicago, and even going in like the Chicago parade and just singing to the Beatles. A lot of people can relate to this movie because everyone wants to have that one day where they can have that day off from school and just celebrate it by just living the best time of their life and just seizing the day, taking the best opportunities possible. And if you're that kid watching right now, this movie's for you. A Few Good Men, one of a few Rob Reiner movies that I own in my collection, starring Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson. Next up is Field of Dreams, starring Kevin Costner, one of the few sports movies that manages to make almost every man cry. You know what the first rule of Fight Club is. Ford v Ferrari, one of my favorite movies of 2019, also directed by James Mangold and starring Christian Bale. Now, I don't normally laugh at a whole lot of rom-coms, but Forgetting Sarah Marshall is the exception that proves the rule. There is a scene where Jason Segel faints after looking at a severely injured wound on Russell Brand's leg, and I howled with laughter. Definitely go see Forgetting Sarah Marshall. We have another one of my favorite movies of all time, Forrest Gump. This is absolutely one of the best movies that Tom Hanks has ever been. This is his best performance and Robert Zemeckis' best movie. Actually, yes, more so than Back to the Future, and that's saying something. This movie has everything. It has a fantastic story. It has amazing performances. It makes you laugh. It makes you cry. And I'm not kidding when I say this. By the end of this movie, I was crying so badly. And to all those people who believe that Pulp Fiction or Shawshank Redemption deserved it more, while I do love both of those movies, Forrest Gump deserved it more. Sorry. Next up is Four Brothers, an underrated John Singleton movie starring Mark Wahlberg and Tyrese Gibson. Four Lions, a brilliant satire that focuses on a group of aspiring yet incompetent suicide bombers. It's a hilarious movie, but it knows when to take the subject matter of terrorism seriously, and 3 words: Rubber Dinghy Rapids. Freddy vs. Jason, another guilty pleasure that was recommended to me by Wasting Money 1. Free Fire is an overlooked action comedy that is basically about an arms deal that goes horrifically wrong, and Armie Hammer in this movie, worth the price of admission. F. Gary Gray's Friday is freaking hysterical, starring Chris Tucker and Ice Cube, one of the best and quotable comedies you can ever see possible. And speaking of ice, you knew that this was coming. Now, in terms of movies that range on being a film that defines who I am as a person and possibly as a film critic, prepare to see this movie on that list if I ever get down to making that video, because it's going to show up on there. Frozen I would describe as one of my favorite animated movies of all time, not only because of how much of a great and fantastic job that Jennifer Lee and Chris Buck do on this movie, based on the writing and on the animation alone, but this was also one of the movies that gave me a very gratifying and personal experience as I was watching the film in the cinema. I truly appreciate how much work and how much effort that Disney went into making this movie, and I cannot praise them highly enough for delivering such a marvelous film. And the same thing can also be applied to Frozen 2. Now, while I do acknowledge that Frozen 2 is not as good as the first movie, in fact, there are some things that I would like to fix in this movie in terms of my updated thoughts, whether it be some things that could be perfectly explained for the audience, just a little bit of suspense, and just a few characters that I think could have been more given dimension to and not feel like a total waste. The sequel still delivers on not only delivering a personal attachment to me, just like the first one, but it also delivers at being in an exceptionally and well-made sequel that personally for me, I think is really underrated and a film that really does Disney sequels right. I've reviewed this movie already on my channel. Please go see it. It's one of my favorite reviews I've ever done. And what's also really special about this movie is that this was my very first private film screening that I have ever seen, along with film critics, and it was so special for me that I decided to go get the 4K exclusive as well, you know, just for a little bit of a special occasion. All I have to say is thank you, Jennifer Lee, thank you, Chris Buck, and also thank you, Disney, for a rare exception, for creating such amazing and beautiful movies, and thank you for creating me a character that I still hold on to my heart to this day, that I connect to on a personal and relatable level that leaves such an impact on my life. It really means a lot. And after that, we got Fruitvale Station, which is a film that I haven't seen yet. This is Ryan Coogler's directorial debut, and I heard that Michael B. Jordan delivers a flat-out phenomenal performance in this movie, so I'm definitely going to give this a watch. Next up is The Fugitive, starring Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones, a movie that is about a man who is framed for the murder of his wife. Next up is Fury, which is a phenomenal war film directed by David Ayer, who I think this is his best film by far, and it features phenomenal performances from Brad Pitt, Logan Lerman, Shia LaBeouf, John Bernthal, Michael Pena, as these group of tankers going up against Nazi soldiers in World War II. Gangs of New York, another DiCaprio and Scorsese project, with also starring the great Daniel Day-Lewis as well. Next up is Get Out, one of the surprising directorial debuts from Jordan Peele, and personally one of my favorite movies of 2017. Next up we have Ghostbusters 1 and 2. I have not seen the second one, but the original Ghostbusters is one of the finest comedies that you can ever possibly see. I mean, it certainly does a whole lot more better than that abortion of a remake, but yeah, Ghostbusters, what a classic. I don't know whether or not I should be ashamed of this movie and that my dignity should not be intact, but I like this superhero. He's always one of my favorites next to Spider-Man and Hulk. Yeah. Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance. This movie is littered with multitudinous, horribly done plot problems in every single aspect. But Nick Cage hams it up. The action scenes are goofy as heck. The detail on the Ghost Rider skull is pretty good. And it's a guilty pleasure of mine. Maximus Aurelius Decimus, father to a dead son, husband to a murdered wife, and he shall have his vengeance in this life and the next. Gladiator, in one word, epic. And speaking of epic, Glory, one of the best war movies of all time. And this is Matthew Broderick's best movie by far, best Denzel Washington performance, best Morgan Freeman performance. And what's really funny to me is that I saw this movie in my middle school history class. And with that being said, I would like to thank my middle school history teacher for showing me this movie, because this film is a freaking masterpiece. Next up we have the incredible 2014 reboot of Godzilla, and then after that we have the satisfying yet incredibly and deeply flawed Godzilla King of the Monsters. This movie was one of my biggest disappointments, not only of the entire 2019 year, but probably of the entire decade, if you ask me. This movie had probably one of the best marketing and one of the best trailers that I have ever seen out of the entire decade, and I was waiting, pleading that this movie was going to be awesome, and unfortunately it just ended up being just average and okay, but I hope it improves on repeated viewings. But Warner Brothers, all I have to say, don't screw up Godzilla vs. Kong. Please, can I just have one cinematic universe from you all that doesn't disappoint me? Gone Girl, a David Fincher movie that I haven't seen yet, but I definitely will in a moment's time. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, one of Sergio Leone's best movies, one of the best performances from Clint Eastwood, and Ennio Morricone, rest in peace by the way, delivers one of the best possible scores for an entire Western ever. Next up is Good Morning Vietnam, a Robin Williams movie that I just got from Amazon. And speaking of Robin Williams and Ben Affleck, who also wrote this movie as well, Good Will Hunting. Now, here's a fun little fact for you all. If you go online and you look up this movie's theatrical release, that's my birthday. I'm not even kidding. This movie's theatrical release date on Friday was the year I was born. So yeah, how crazy is that? Hey you guys! I'm sorry, that was a bad sloth impersonation. Anyway, The Goonies, Steven Spielberg produced this and Richard Donner directed this, post-Superman 1 and 2. Next up is Gran Torino, one of the greatest performances that have ever been given by Clint Eastwood, and one of the things that I love about this movie is that there is a specific scene where Clint Eastwood's character is looking at this kid, and he's looking very lonesome and very sorry for himself, because he wanted to ask out and impress this girl. And Clint Eastwood delivers like a very harsh and realistic speech that I'm like, not only is it like pretty hilarious and harsh, but it's also quite pretty inspirational. So yeah, that's my piece on this film. Now get off of my lawn. Call it overrated all you want to. Gravity is one of the best space movies that have ever been burned to a piece of celluloid. It is an amazing, visually stunning thrill ride that features beautiful cinematography, groundbreaking visual effects, and terrific performances from Sandra Bullock and George Clooney. You can absolutely tell how hard Alfonso Cuarón worked on this movie to give you the very suspenseful feel of what it is like to be in the vacuum of space, alone and isolated, trying to get back into Earth. And in Gravity, Alfonso Cuarón masters it with aplomb. Green Mile, another film that is starring Tom Hanks that is destined to make every single man in the theater cry. Green Zone, starring Matt Damon, directed by Paul Greengrass. I haven't seen this movie. I'm a huge fan of Paul Greengrass with the likes of the Bourne movies and even Captain Phillips, which is one of my favorite films of the past decade. But I'm pretty anxious to see what Green Zone is like, so I'll definitely give this a shot. Gremlins, a very good Christmas movie, and Gizmo's one of the cutest things ever, especially when he's blowing that little trumpet. How can you not say aww to that? Next up is A Grey, a film that was recommended by me by the Dishonored Wolf, who pretty much praised this movie to no end. Once again, I haven't seen this film yet, but once again, I'll give it a shot. Next up is Mel Gibson's theatrical comeback in Hacksaw Ridge, a film that features a very pacifistic soldier who is only caring about taking care of people, saving them in wars without having to use a single weapon in the battlefield once. And it's based on the true story of Desmond Doss, starring Andrew Garfield having one of the best performances of his whole career. John Carpenter's Halloween is a horror movie classic. One of my favorite horror movies of all time. Michael Myers, one of the greatest horror movie antagonists that have ever been released into the film industry. This movie gives you everything in terms of horror, from atmosphere, claustrophobia, paranoia, the fear of the unknown, and giving you the fear that maybe at some point a serial killer is right behind you to kill you with a kitchen knife. And even despite, after all the okay sequels to the very abhorrent remakes by Rob Zombie, and even an okay reboot in 2018, this film stands head and neck above the competition. Hancock is an okay superhero movie starring Will Smith, and this was a film that was directed by Peter Berg before he did movies like Lone Survivor, Deepwater Horizon, Patriots Day. For what it's worth, I think this is a pretty okay superhero movie. Next up is my favorite movie I have ever saw from South by Southwest, and it's my first movie I ever saw from South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. Hardcore Henry. I cannot describe how much I love this movie. Everything that transpired from the action sequences and the interesting characters from Henry, Jimmy, the villain Cain, and the fact that this movie has one of the best uses of Queen's Don't Stop Me Now blows my mind. If you are an action movie lover, this is something that you desperately need to get. But if you have motion sickness, do not watch this movie. It's really gonna make you sick. But if you really want to see a movie that pays homage to 80s action movies and plays also as a first-person shooter satire, go see Hardcore Freaking Henry. Heat, another Michael Mann movie that stars Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. Next up is Spike Jonze's Her, a movie about a man whose daily occupation is basically just writing nice letters to other people, making them feel well, and him just building a heartfelt connection with the advanced operating system that is voiced by Scarlett Johansson. And this also was a movie I got from Amazon. I can't wait to see the final result of this movie. I heard wonderful things about it. Next up in the collection is Disney's Hercules, the only good Hercules movie that exists. James Woods' Hades is phenomenal, perfect casting, and I think this is one of my favorite films of the Disney Renaissance. Next up is High Fidelity, starring John Cusack. And if you want to talk about action satires like Hardcore Henry, Hot Fuzz is another one of those movies. This is one of my favorite movies from Edgar Wright, and probably my favorite movie of the entire Cornetto trilogy, and if you haven't seen this movie yet, please do so for the greater good. The greater good. Alright, next up, we got my favorite DreamWorks movies that have ever been released. How to Train Your Dragon 1, which is a film I saw twice with my dad and still love to this day. How to Train Your Dragon 2, which is just as good, if not better, than the first one. And How to Train Your Dragon 3, while it does have its flaws and predictable moments here and there, and a few familiarities and cliches in the film, it still serves as an adequate, solid conclusion to the Dragon trilogy. Now, while I have stated before that Aladdin and Frozen is one of my favorite Disney movies of all time, The Hunchback of Notre Dame is my favorite Disney movie that I have ever seen in my entire life. I love every single solitary thing about this movie, from the animation to the songs. The score by Alan Menken is some of the best pieces of music I have ever heard in a movie. And all the way to the characters like Quasimodo, Esmeralda, Captain Phoebus, and even my favorite Disney villain, and even my favorite villain in a film ever. Judge Claude Frollo, voiced by Tony Jay. He's everything that makes a villain perfect, he's manipulative, he's one step ahead of the protagonist, and he's smart and intelligent. Not to mention that he has the best Disney villain song of all time. Sorry, be prepared. One of my top 10 favorite movies right here. Next up is I Am Legend, starring Will Smith, as he is basically the last man on Earth trying to survive with his dog and finding a cure for the rest of humanity. It's too bad that the ending sucks, but I know this also has an alternate theatrical version, which I saw it and it was okay. Not great, but it was okay. If there is ever a point where I can start reviewing guilty pleasures on my channel, I'm starting with this movie right here. I, Frankenstein. I, ironically, love this movie. I've seen it more times than any other movie in 2014. I've seen it more times than my favorite movie of the year, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I'm not lying about this. I've seen it so many times, and it never, ever ceases to make me happy. This movie is silly, goofy, ridiculous, and it has a plot that is ripped straight out of Blade and Underworld, but this movie is terrific. In fact, at some point, I'm gonna watch this film. I'm gonna watch it again. Seriously, Aaron Eckhart is Frankenstein, and he fights gargoyles and demons. You can't get better than this. The original Ice Age is something that I loved and grew up with in my childhood. It's directed by Chris Wedge, who also voices the character of Scrat, who I also loved as a kid. And as of right now, this is Blue Sky's best movie by a huge margin. Next up is In the Heart of the Sea, directed by Ron Howard, who would create an event that would inspire the book of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. I remember liking this movie the first time. Hopefully I'll get around watching it somewhere down the road. Inception just turned 10 years old, and a lot of people would consider this to be Christopher Nolan's magnum opus. I wouldn't say it's his definitive magnum opus, but as of right now, I think this film is quite the darn classic. I think the only negative I really have with Inception, aside from the two-dimensional characters, is the fact that it made Lights, Camera, Jackson a thing. Other than that, I really love Inception, and I cannot wait for Christopher Nolan's next project, and Tenet, that deals with the concept of time travel. The movie that made Will Smith a star, Independence Day. This is a film that you should definitely watch on Independence Day, and this is probably the best or second best movie that Roland Emmerich has ever made. And that says a lot. Next up is Inglourious Basterds, Quentin Tarantino. Inside Man, a Spike Lee movie that I have yet to see. Next up is Pixar's Inside Out. Not one of the best Pixar movies that have ever been released. I mean, this movie is no WALL-E, Up, or The Incredibles, or the first 3 Toy Story movies. But on its own, I think this is a fairly decent and well-made Pixar film for what it is. Now this next movie is also a guilty pleasure, but one that also proves just how much of a god Chuck Norris is. Invasion USA. It's Chuck Norris as Matt Hunter, a one-man army fighting Russians. Gotta love it. Isle of Dogs, one of my favorite movies of 2018, and still once again proves just how much of a genius Wes Anderson is in the stop-motion animation department. Some people have stated that It's a Wonderful Life is one of the best Christmas movies ever made, if not the best Christmas movie ever made. And you know what? I concur with every single bit of that statement. James Stewart, one of my favorite actors, delivers one of his best performances in a long time, but what really breaks me is the fact that not only did this movie bomb at the box office, but this movie lost at the Academy Awards for Best Picture. I don't know which is more of a crying shame, but hey, you know what they say, every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. A movie that scared an entire nation of people, driving them to get out of the water. Jaws. One of Steven Spielberg's best movies that he has ever made, and one of my favorite horror movies of all time. Put that cookie down! No! Jingle all the way. Alright, next up we got another trilogy on our hands, so let's do this. John Wick 1, which I think is the best one. John Wick 2, which I think was the worst one, specifically with its egregious villain. And John Wick 3, which is the middle of the road in terms of the action films. I really like the John Wick movies, but I think one of my biggest problems in regards to the John Wick films is the fact that they're basically trying to turn John Wick into John McClane from Live Free or Die Hard, because at every single point in the movie, whether in any circumstances where he could get killed, a whole bunch of plot armor gets inserted into John Wick, in which he can survive like a 7-story or 8-story fall from a building after getting shot or betrayed, and he can also survive heat and dehydration, and he can also survive not 1, but 2 car bumps and still continues walking. I hope John Wick 4 not only fixes those problems with the John Wick character, and not only that, but next time, expand upon your world building, and also give me a great villain this time. It's not so hard. Next up is Jojo Rabbit, directed by Taika Waititi, one of my favorite movies of 2019. And speaking of one of my favorite movies of 2019, there is no other movie that I would say as unjustly reviled and misunderstood as Joker. The reason why this movie was garnering so much controversy is the fact that media outlets was saying that it's going to inspire mass shootings and violence across the globe. 12 months have gone by, and the only movie to have caused certain violence across the globe was during a screening of Frozen 2 when there was a machete brawl that happened. And no, I'm not making that up. But what's really fascinating about me is that Todd Phillips went from comedies like the Hangover movies and went all the way over to this comic book revisionist drama about a mentally challenged person going through so much trauma and abuse in his life, all the while transforming into the great character from the comic books that we know today as the Joker. Brilliant character study, Joaquin Phoenix absolutely deserved his Oscar, and this movie made me smile and put on a happy face. Next up we have more Quentin Tarantino movies, Kill Bill Volume 1, and Kill Bill Volume 2. In terms of movies made by a visionary director that go over 3 hours long, you're never gonna get a movie as good as Peter Jackson's King Kong. And believe me, the pacing of the movie may start to drag a little bit, but once you finally get to that island and you see King Kong, played by Andy Serkis in all of his glory, you're in for a 3-hour journey you will never forget. And King Kong fighting 4 V-Rexes while holding Naomi Watts in the palm of his hand, one of the best fight scenes I have ever seen of all time. Kingsman: The Secret Service is a great comic book movie that also manages to make fun and basically be a satire of the whole spy genre, including James Bond. And as much as I think that this movie is terrific, the sequel don't even bother. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, one of the few buddy cop comedies that Shane Black has made over his entire career. This was before he went AWOL with Iron Man 3 and The Predator. Next up is Krampus, directed by Michael Dougherty before he royally disappointed me with Godzilla King of the Monsters. But I truly appreciate this movie because Michael Dougherty does a really great job at paying an homage to the dark Christmas comedies like Gremlins, putting in the great scares but also hilarious comedy, as well as inserting moments of practical effects and CG in the mix. This is a really overlooked Christmas comedy, and eventually sometime soon it's gonna be a cult classic. And speaking of King Kong, we have the Warner Brothers MonsterVerse version of King Kong and Kong Skull Island. This movie delivers everything you want out of a monster movie. It's campy, it's silly, it's over the top, and outrageously violent even for a PG-13 film. Not to mention the monster brawls in this movie, badass to say the least. Kubo and the Two Strings is the best stop-motion animated film that Laika has ever made ever since Coraline in 2009. One of my absolute favorite animated films of the past decade. And speaking of animation, next up we have the first two Kung Fu Panda movies, that being Kung Fu Panda 1, which I think is a fantastic movie by DreamWorks, and Kung Fu Panda 2, which is not only one of the best animated movies of the past decade, but I think is a film that is even better than the original. And not only are they both great as animated movies, but they serve really well as solid martial arts films, and both of which even have amazing villains. Ian McShane as Tai Lung in the first one, and Gary Oldman as Lord Shin in the second one. LA Confidential got this one for Christmas, and I've heard that this one is quite the masterpiece, but I have to wait and see. La La Land, one of my favorite movies of 2016, directed by Damien Chazelle, who did Whiplash. Not as good as Whiplash, but still this movie does a fantastic job at selling a great romance movie and even as a good musical. The Last Samurai, starring Tom Cruise as a Civil War veteran who fights alongside the samurai, one of them being played by Ken Watanabe. Lawless, a gangster movie starring Shia LaBeouf and Tom Hardy, both actors who during filming kinda hated each other. And On Pete was not a movie that I expected to be so good, but as soon as I saw this movie for the first time, it landed at my #1 best film of 2018. And it still landed as one of my favorite movies of the decade. This movie is such a well-shot and beautifully acted and very bleak coming-of-age story about the main character Charlie, who was played by Charlie Plummer, which is Christopher Plummer's grandson, of going across this dangerous and rugged odyssey of trying to find the closest place that he calls home after his father passes away. This is one of the best movies, if not my favorite A24 film that the company has ever done. And if you have not seen it yet, please do so. You're going to be in for an emotional roller coaster. The Lego Movie was something I expected to be a totally overblown and soulless commercial for the Lego toys. But thanks to Phil Lord and Christopher Miller's direction, they somehow managed to create an amazing story out of it. And yeah, what can I say? Everything about this movie is awesome. Liar Liar, Jim Carrey at his absolute finest. Life Itself, the documentary about one of the greatest film critics to ever walk the earth, Roger Ebert. I've just got this movie on Amazon, and I cannot wait to see what this movie is like. Why'd you spill your beans? The Lighthouse is one of my favorite movies of 2019, and it's, I think, one of my favorite horror films that the A24 film company has ever produced. Phenomenal performances from Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson, and great job from Robert Edgers, who managed to surprise me after his previous film The Witch, which I was not a fan of, as it creates a story about these two light keepers while also throwing in Greek mythology into the mix without having it seem forced. And that ending? Pretty horrifying. Much like Captain America Civil War, The Avengers, and Joker, Logan was one of the best comic book movies that I have seen out of the entire decade, with Hugh Jackman delivering his final performance as the character of the Wolverine, aka Logan. And I think this film stands testament as one of the greatest X-Men movies, if not the best X-Men movie that I have ever seen, even while acknowledging that it kind of does borrow elements from Children of Men. Lone Survivor is a movie that redeemed careers for both Peter Berg and Taylor Kitsch, both of which were responsible for featuring and directing in Battleship, but also featured the great return of Mark Wahlberg as an action-leading man, as he will be eventually showing up in more movies featuring Peter Berg's direction in Deepwater Horizon and Patriots Day. It's been a long time since I've seen a movie like Rian Johnson's Looper. Does this movie hold up and does it make sense with the aspects of time travel and its storytelling? Maybe. Probably not. I don't know. And of course, like every Blu-ray collection, no Blu-ray collection is complete without buying a copy of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, this is the theatrical versions. I do not have the extended cut, but is it really worth buying the extended cuts? Comment down below if you really want me to get the extended cuts. Hopefully I'll get them soon, but as far as I'm concerned, These three movies are epic, they are amazing. This movie has some of the best characters, one of the best storylines, one of the greatest adaptations that have ever been brought to the big screen, directed from the mind of one Peter Jackson. This is Peter Jackson's magnum opus if we've ever seen one. And I want to give a big shout out to my dad who recommended to me and watched these movies with me. One of my favorite movies of all time, and if you were to ask me which one is my favorite, Return of the King, baby. For Frodo. The completely underrated and overlooked Lost City of Z was one of my favorite movies of 2017, directed by James Gray, who also did Ad Astra. As this movie features the story about an explorer trying to go and find a lost city in the Amazon, with Charlie Hunnam delivering his best performance of his entire career. Next up, we have all four Mad Max movies, with Mad Max, The Road Warrior, Beyond Thunderdome, and of course, my absolute favorite, my favorite action movie of all time, Mad Max Fury Road. Every single aspect of this movie as an action film, and even as a movie, is perfect. It's flawless. It's outstanding in every conceivable word. You cannot get a movie like this anymore. This is a film that doesn't get made nowadays. Unquestionably, this is the best George Miller movie that he has ever made, with Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron, who also hated each other on set, delivering amazing performances as Max Rakatansky and Furiosa. Not to mention Hugh Keys-Byrne, who played the toe cutter in the first Mad Max as a Morton Joe. Great, amazing casting. One of the best action scenes ever. One of the best cinematography ever. One of the best editing, sound design, characters. Not to mention the unbelievable world building in this post-apocalyptic setting. One of the best action movies of the past decade. One of my favorite action movies, if not my favorite action movie of all time. And yes, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. Speaking of one of the best movies of 2015, Ridley Scott's return to form in The Martian, starring Matt Damon, based on a best-selling novel, might I add, by Andy Weir. Next up is Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, directed by Peter Weir of Dead Poets Society fame, starring Russell Crowe. And also, one of the best action movies in recent memory, The Matrix. My very first R-rated movie that I have ever seen as a kid. This is an action movie that still holds up to its day, with some of the best action scenes, including Neo versus Agent Smith, including visual effects and directing from the Wachowski brothers that still holds up to this very day. And also, this was a movie that turned Keanu Reeves as Neo into an action movie legend. Whoa, indeed. We have some of my favorite comedies of all time, that being Monty Python and the Holy Grail and Monty Python's Life of Brian. Guys, I'm not even kidding. The Monty Python gang are absolute legends when it comes to comedies. These two films right here are some of the finest, hilarious, and quotable comedies that you can ever come across. Please, go get these two movies. And to complete the Monty Python comedy trilogy, I had to get Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. I haven't seen this movie yet, but I desperately want to see if this is as good as the other two. But the movie that beat Hardcore Henry out for Best Movie of 2016 was A Monster Calls. This movie, to say the least, is an absolute masterpiece. What J.A. Bayona done to create this amazing and beautiful adaptation of one of my favorite books of all time, created by Patrick Ness, is something that will continuously live on for days upon years upon decades. And since I love the book so much, and since they also made me cry at the end of the book, I also wanted to see how good this movie was, and by the end of this film, no joke, I cried 3 times after I saw the film. J.A. Bayona, you made a coming-of-age film for the ages. Next up, we have the Digibook of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and this movie just proves how much of a directing legend that Frank Capra was, and how much of a movie acting icon that James Stewart was in his time. An amazing movie that tells the story about a man who's trying to stand up against a very corrupted and jaded government. Controversial for its time, but an absolute classic nonetheless. Next up is Moon, directed by David Bowie's son, Duncan Jones, before he made movies like Source Code and Warcraft. National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, another Christmas classic. Next up is Network, and if you have not seen this movie, I'll be mad as hell, and I won't take it anymore. Next up is the Best Picture winner, No Country for Old Men, and this was possibly the greatest movie that the Coen brothers have ever made in their entire careers, and then the third act happened, and I didn't mind it. I thought it was very okay, but they could have delivered a better payoff than that, even if it was based off of how the ending happened in the book. Steady hands. Steady hands. Okay. Nightcrawler was one of the best movies that I've seen in 2014, and Jake Gyllenhaal as Lou Bloom delivers one of the best performances, if not his best performance of his entire career. It's too bad he wasn't nominated for an Oscar for it. Pain and Gain, directed by Michael Bay, tells the true story of two meatheads who are trying to live up the American dream as they get constantly berated into these criminal offenses, and they are currently, as of right now, on death row. As much as I wanted 1917 to win Best Picture, I cannot deny how much of a spellbinding and well-written masterpiece that Parasite was. One of the best movies that Bong Joon-ho has ever made in his entire career. Fantastic performances, brilliant screenplay, and well-executed directing. Objectively, one of the absolute best movies of 2019, and congratulations to Parasite to being the first foreign film to win Best Picture. Roland Emmerich's The Patriot, starring Mel Gibson, is a very solid war movie that centers around the American Revolution, despite having a few flaws and story cliches. Patriots Day, another Mark Wahlberg and Peter Berg project that centers around the Boston Marathon bombing. In 2015, nothing gave me more of a nostalgic experience unlike the Peanuts movie. Ever since I was a kid, I used to love and watch the Charlie Brown films as a kid, and still read the newspaper comics of the Peanuts. I loved all the characters back then, like Snoopy, to Charlie Brown, to Linus, to Lucy, and this movie right here from Blue Sky Studios, who is also responsible for the Ice Age movies, gave me that nostalgic experience back. Next up is another John Hughes movie, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. This one was recommended to me by Wasting Money 1, which is his favorite movie of all time. If it bleeds, we can kill it. Predator is a stone-cold action movie classics that balances and binds the elements of sci-fi and horror and puts it all into this one movie. Starring an all-star cast with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Carl Weathers, Jesse Ventura, and Shane Black, who also directed the abortion known as The Predator in 2018. Well, at least it's a good thing he died first. And this movie was also directed by John McTiernan, who also worked on the Die Hard movies, and I hope John McTiernan goes out of retirement and makes more movies like this. That would be wonderful. The next movie I have is also in the Predator franchise. That is Predators, directed by Robert Rodriguez. This movie is incredibly familiar in its plot structure. In fact, it's essentially a cardboard remake of the original Predator, while adding some interesting stuff into the mix and minus the likable and charismatic protagonists. As an action movie, it's pretty good. As a Predator movie, it's fine. Now, aside from masterworks from the DreamWorks animation studio, that being How to Train Your Dragon and Kung Fu Panda, The Prince of Egypt is by far and away one of DreamWorks' undisputed masterpiece, not just of their entire company, but of the 2D animated era. I used to watch this movie all the time as a kid because I was super fascinated in biblical stories such as David and Goliath, Noah, the creation of Adam and Eve, and even the story of Exodus with Moses and Ramses. The animation is breathtaking even by DreamWorks standards, and even the songs and even the score by Hans Zimmer, which I usually kind of harp on most of the time. I'm telling you guys, every single time he makes a score for an animated movie like from The Lion King, he's good! Especially in that moment where the Red Sea parts, and you see the Jews going right through the sea, seeing all sorts of fish and whales as they pass by. Unbelievably beautiful in every discernible way. If you are a religious person, you will love this movie, and if you're not a religious person, you'll also love this movie. Next up is The Princess Bride, another undeniable classic from the directing work of Rob Reiner. And this movie, as Wallace Shawn would put it, inconceivable. And speaking of awesome action movies, the original Point Break, starring Keanu Reeves as FBI rookie Johnny Utah and Patrick Swayze as Bodhi, a charismatic surfer who was also the leader of the infamous bank robbers, the ex-presidents. One of Catherine Bigelow's best action movies. Get Point Break as soon as you can, and as far as the remake is concerned, yeah, we don't talk about that film. Poltergeist, a movie directed by Tobe Hooper of the infamous Texas Chainsaw Massacre, also produced by Steven Spielberg, and here's an interesting fact about Poltergeist. There is a moment in this movie where one of the characters comes across skeletons, and the skeletons are actually real skeletons from dead people. And nobody told the cast members this. But hey, kudos to Tobe Hooper of making the cast scared reactions real and authentic. And speaking of horror movies, one of the greatest horror films ever made by Alfred Hitchcock, Psycho. Everyone knows this movie by now. The shower scene, Norman Bates, we go a little mad sometimes. It is completely mandatory that you own this movie, and if you haven't seen it yet, it's not an option that you do so, it's a requirement. Pulp Fiction is unquestionably Quentin Tarantino's undisputed magnum opus. One of the best screenplays that have ever been written on a piece of paper. The way it manages to handle several different stories and combine them all into one cohesive narrative is simply mesmerizing and something we have never seen the likes before in the early 90s. Seriously, the screenplay for this movie is so good that I actually own a copy of the movie's entire script. And Samuel L. Jackson's Ezekiel 25:17 speech? Need I say more? Next up is John Krasinski's A Quiet Place, a film that I actually saw at South by Southwest, and I also got to interview John Krasinski over a Q&A session after the film, so that was a pretty cool experience for me. The other thing that I'm known for this movie for, aside from taking advantage of the gimmick of using silence as best as possible in a world where aliens are trying to kill you as they detect you by sound, but this movie is also known for its contrivances, its narrative plot holes, and world-building inconsistencies, but I don't know, I guess I'll have to wait and see until I ever watch this movie again, so as far as I'm concerned, A Quiet Place, pretty solid horror movie. One of the biggest classics by the dynamic duo of Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese in Raging Bull. I'm a very good driver. Rain Man, starring Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman, one of which is an egotistical car salesman, and the other one is an autistic savant, and both of which are brothers going on the ride of their lifetime. It's a truly moving and powerful movie, and if you have a sibling, or if you have a daughter or a son who is autistic themselves, you will relate to this movie. Next up are two bone-crunchingly badass movies that came from the brilliant talent of one Gareth Evans. The Raid 1 and The Raid 2. 4 words in regards to The Raid 2. Rama versus the Assassin. That's all I gotta say. Watch that fight scene. I remember in 2018 having a tremendous blast with this movie. It was one of my most anticipated movies of the entire year, but I gotta really say, Ready Player One does not hold up too well. Yes, there was a lot of fun and entertaining action sequences and some good performances here and there. However, in terms of the story and the characters, it's not perfect. In fact, there is a whole lot of problems with it. Like the fact that nobody has ever thought of the idea of driving backwards even since the original creator, James Halliday, has created an entire archive building simply just to find clues for the first puzzle. Or how about the fact that in the second challenge, the poem reads, a creator who hates his own creation, and they picked The Shining because it's a character's 11th favorite horror movie. But that's not a movie of a creator who hates his own creation. Stanley Kubrick did not hate his own movie. Neither did Stephen King, who hated his own book. He just hated the adaptation. Hating your adaptation does not equal hating your own creation. Yeah, this is one of Steven Spielberg's weakest movies, but as far as the movie goes, it's flawed as heck, but fun. Wolverines! Red Dawn, the original, not the remake with Chris Hemsworth, but the original with Patrick Swayze, which is a film I will see really, really soon. The Revenant, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, directed by the man who did Birdman. This movie was a film that almost killed Leonardo DiCaprio during production, but it was also the movie that made him win Best Actor at the Academy Awards, so that's a plus on his part. This movie is raw, bleak, and beautiful, especially with its cinematography by Emmanuel Lubensky, and not only bloody, especially from its climax between Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hardy, and even that infamous bear sequence. My word. Rise of the Guardians is not one of the best animated films that DreamWorks has ever made, but still on its own, it's an exceptionally solid animated film that just so happens to be pretty much the Avengers just for little kids, containing all the legendary and magical characters such as Santa Claus, the Sandman, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, Pitch Black, aka the Boogeyman, and also Jack Frost. And speaking of solid DreamWorks movies, I can pretty much say the exact same thing for a movie like The Road to El Dorado. I just watched this movie recently, and it's a very okay and decent animated film by DreamWorks, not one of their best. But if there's any reason to see this movie aside from the animation, it's the brilliant voice chemistry between Kenneth Branagh and Kevin Kline as Miguel and Tulio. And also the soundtrack from Elton John, pretty good. Your move, creep. RoboCop, another action movie satire with great social commentary, especially from the director of Paul Verhoeven. You all know the lines, you all know the references, you know the great villain Clarence Boddicker. I mean, who can deny the brilliant classic known as RoboCop? I like the Elton John song Rocket Man. The Rock, starring Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage, one of Michael Bay's best movies, which doesn't really say a whole lot because the vast majority of Michael Bay movies are pretty bad, to say the least. Guys, do I even need to explain the next movie in this collection? It's The Room. It's the freaking Room. One of the best worst movies of all time, practically one of the most quoted guilty pleasures and one of the most watched guilty pleasures of all time. Directed, written, produced, and starring the legendary actor Tommy Wiseau. And this movie right here would not only spawn the book The Disaster Artist, but would also manifest the movie called The Disaster Artist starring Dave and James Franco. You have to see this movie to believe it. If you haven't seen this movie yet, go into this movie blind. I'm not even kidding, that is all you have to do. Do it with friends for all I care, but you have to see The Room. It is not only an exceptional requirement, but it's something that you need to see right now. And here's another Peter Berg movie, this time not starring Mark Wahlberg. It's The Rundown starring The Rock and Seann William Scott. The Sandlot, a childhood classic about a group of baseball kids as they're trying to grab an autographed baseball from Babe Ruth away from a dangerous, ginormous dog in a neighbor's yard. Completely and totally memorable from beginning to end. And if there's one thing I really liked about this movie, it's the fact that this kid with the glasses manages to accomplish every single young kid's dream. And next up we come to perhaps the greatest war movie that has ever been made by the mind of Steven Spielberg, Saving Private Ryan, starring Tom Hanks. Piteous shame that it loses to Shakespeare in Love at the Academy Awards for Best Picture. But this movie is one of the greatest and biggest achievements that Steven Spielberg has ever created in his entire life. And this movie does everything that a war movie should do, not only because of its violence and how horrifying that the war was in World War II, especially during that D-Day sequence, but this movie gets you heavily invested in the narrative, and especially with these characters, particularly Captain John Miller, who is played by Tom Hanks. Saving Private Ryan is the greatest war movie in existence. See this movie if you haven't immediately. Next up, say hello to my little friend in the gold edition Blu-ray of Scarface. I've been anxious to see this movie, and at some point I definitely will see this film. I heard that this movie is phenomenal in every sense of the word, and Al Pacino delivers his best performance of his entire career, so at some point I will get to see the masterwork of Brian De Palma's Scarface. Now, please do not shoot me because I have not seen this movie yet, but the reason why I got it is because I heard people say that it's a definite requirement that you buy it, and I heard that it's one of the most important films ever made, especially from Steven Spielberg. Schindler's List. I know that this movie is based on a true story, and I know that this movie stars Liam Neeson as he's trying to save more than 1,000 Jews during the Holocaust away from the Nazis. And I've also heard from a lot of people that this was an emotionally moving and incredibly powerful film, and probably Steven Spielberg's best movie he's ever made in a long time. And that it was also released in the exact same year as Jurassic Park, might I add. So yeah, you can definitely bet on the fact that sometime soon, I'm gonna watch the heck out of Schindler's List. Next up is Edgar Wright's criminally overlooked and underrated Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, one of my favorite movies of 2010, and the reason why I have this movie in my collection is because a friend of mine who I used to work with at a movie theater, one of her favorite movies of all time was Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and she also loved the entire manga series that the film was also based on. And I myself was very interested in reading the entire manga collection, so I borrowed it from her for a couple of days, read the entire books, and I really love the manga books, and as a movie on its own, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, one of Edgar Wright's best. Seven is not only one of my favorite mystery movies of all time, but it's one of the greatest movies that I have ever seen in my entire life, as it stars Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman as two detectives as they try to find a serial killer who kills each of his victims, with each murder symbolizing one of the 7 deadly sins. This movie has phenomenal performances all around, one of the best jump scares that I've seen for a movie, and the ending of this movie, whoa. Seven Psychopaths, a movie I just got from Amazon. This movie was directed by Martin Madonna, who also worked on the film 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. Curious as to see what this movie is like. And the next after that, we have Guillermo del Toro's Best Picture winning The Shape of Water, a film that focuses and has a unique twist on the Beauty and the Beast formula that is set in the 1960s Cold War in Maryland, and it has one of the best performances of 2017, especially from Sally Hawkins as this very deaf employee, including Michael Shannon, Richard Deakins, and Octavia Spencer, and Doug Jones as great supporting characters. Guillermo del Toro, you definitely deserved your Best Directing Oscar, and The Shape of Water, what a tremendous love story. Andy Dufresne never won an Oscar that day. Yeah. You know I went there. But seriously, what a freaking remarkable movie The Shawshank Redemption is. Directed by Frank Darabont, as he also done The Green Mile, and hasn't made a good movie ever since, as he creates this amazing movie that was based on the Stephen King novella about a man who was imprisoned in Shawshank Redemption for a crime he did not commit, as he tries to escape that penitentiary and make it out on the other side. And here's something a little bit interesting about the Shawshank Redemption. In the novella, the character Red is Irish, hence his name. In the movie, the character Red is obviously played by Morgan Freeman, who's obviously an African-American actor. But the thing is that Frank Darabont did not hire him for his race. He hired him for his acting abilities and how competent that Morgan Freeman can be. So this right here is one of the prime examples that Hollywood, as of right now, should be learning a lesson from. Not hiring actors for the race, but hiring them for their competence and their abilities. What else can I say about Shawshank Redemption? Absolutely mesmerizing in every sense of the word. Next up, we have Shazam. That's actually pretty cool. This movie, in my own humble opinion, is probably the best movie in the DC cinematic universe, which doesn't really say a whole lot because the vast majority of their movies are either mediocre or burn in hell material. But this movie legitimately surprised me. I thought this movie was going to be generic, but it was probably the most fun I have ever had watching a movie from the DC cinematic universe. Wonderful performances from Asher Angel and Zachary Levi as Billy Batson, aka Shazam, and this movie, at the same time, also served as a good Christmas movie, so keep that in mind. Speaking of movies that Ready Player One references, The Shining. Yes, I understand that this movie is not a good adaptation of Stephen King's novel. In fact, Stephen King has every right to not like the adaptation. But as a horror movie on its own merits, you cannot deny just how much of a horror movie masterpiece that The Shining is. It's creepy, it's atmospheric, and Stanley Kubrick, yet another masterpiece in his filmography. Next up we have Sideways, which is an Alexander Payne film starring Paul Giamatti and Thomas Hayden Church. Hello, Clarice. But yeah, Silence of the Lambs, one of the best picture winners to ever come out in the 1990s, and Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, an absolute performance to remember. One of the greatest villains ever put on screen. Sin City, another movie directed by Robert Rodriguez that is also based on the Frank Miller graphic novel series. If you want to talk about underrated thrillers, Sorcerer, directed by William Friedkin, is where it's at. This is a movie about 4 individuals who are driving cargo trucks that are filled with very unstable, volatile nitroglycerin that if one screw-up happens, boom, everybody dies. And it's incredibly suspenseful, especially in moments like that one scene where the guys are driving cargo trucks over this very rickety bridge and they have nowhere else to go. And this is especially an overlooked movie as well because not a lot of people went to go see this movie. You wanna know why? Because this movie came out at the exact same week or weeks apart from the original Star Wars. Yeah. How about that? Space Jam, a movie starring Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny and the rest of the Looney Tunes gang as they try to fend off an army of aliens during a basketball game. It's silly, it's goofy, but you know what? It is what it is. Next up is Speed, starring Keanu Reeves, probably Jan de Bont's best movie before he crapped the bed with Speed 2 Cruise Control. But this movie for its time about an LAPD SWAT team member trying to defuse a bomb on a bus that is going more than 50 miles per hour, and if it slows down, it will explode, was one of the finest action movies in the 1990s. And then we have the creme de la creme of superhero movies, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. I love these Spider-Man films, except for Spider-Man 3, which that movie is incredibly flawed and has a heck ton of issues. It's mainly the first 2 Sam Raimi movies that I hold such a fondness for. Spider-Man has always been one of my favorite superheroes and one of my favorite movie characters in recent memory. It has one of the greatest origin stories I have ever seen out of a superhero movie, and Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, will always live on as my favorite Spider-Man. And then luckily, after a few years have gone by when Sony has destroyed the Spider-Man license with The Amazing Spider-Man, they finally brought my faith in humanity again and in the Spider-Man character with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. This is one of the most visually unique and innovative animated movies that I probably have ever seen in my life, as well as it being one of my favorite animated movies of the past decade. And you know what? The sequel is coming out in 2022. Can't wait. The Spider-Way Chronicles is a very underrated kids movie for me because I am such a huge fan at understanding mythological creatures such as fairies, dwarves, goblins, monsters, trolls, griffins, you name it. And a little story I want to share with you all is that I was probably interested in this movie mostly because of the posters that I saw, and I was like, oh, that looks pretty cool. And then I saw a trailer for it, and the trailer scared the crap out of me. But then I finally manned up and decided that in February 14th of 2008, I am gonna go see Spider-Way Chronicles. And sure enough, I did with the rest of my family, and I really liked it a lot. Not to mention that after this movie was over, I was so intrigued that I started to read some of the Spiderwick Chronicles books, and I even read Arthur Spiderwick's field guide in the library. So I guess it just goes to show you that curiosity can make you like movies like this. And along with the Stephen King collection, we have Stand By Me, one of my all-time favorite coming-of-age films, directed by Rob Reiner. This is the kind of movie that makes you look fondly at your childhood, where you had so much time with your friends that you could just revisit that childhood memory just once more, and it just makes you feel nostalgic for those memories. So yeah, definitely see Stand By Me. Star Trek Beyond, surprisingly the only Star Trek movie I own in my collection. I will get the original Star Trek movies one day. I don't have the first two J.J. Abrams movies because I don't even know, do I really want to get Star Trek Into Darkness? Because my god, that movie is so flawed. It's not even funny, especially from Robert Orci and Alex Kurtzman's writing. Disastrous. But hey, despite me not being a huge fan of Star Trek Into Darkness, Star Trek Beyond, a pretty good successor. I have a question for all of you people. Does Star Wars The Force Awakens hold up 5 years later? My answer? Hell no. And believe me, there are far more reasons as to why this movie does not hold up well, despite it just being a complete rehash of A New Hope. I think this movie was particularly loved by so many people, mainly because of the marketing hype and the fact that we haven't seen such a Star Wars movie in a long time since the prequels, which a lot of the people hated, and I wasn't also a huge fan either of. However, if there's any reason to go see The Force Awakens, it's that after you finish these movies, go check out the video content and the review made by ER, and a critique series from one of my favorite video analysts on YouTube as of right now, Mahler. His movie critiques are freaking phenomenal, especially his Last Jedi reviews and his current Unbridled Rage videos. Love those guys, check out their content as soon as you can, and The Force Awakens, more like The Farce Awakens. Straight Outta Compton, a well-executed and historically accurate biodrama about the rap group NWA that consists of Dr. Dre, Eazy-E, and Ice Cube, who is played by Ice Cube's son, O'Shea Jackson Jr. And this is another fantastic movie that was once again directed again by F. Gary Gray, who you're already familiar with as the person who directed Friday. Now I know what you're thinking. Why do I own a Blu-ray copy of the worst movie I've ever seen in my entire life, Zack Snyder's Sucker Punch? Well, I'm going to be keeping this for a special occasion if I ever get down to reviewing this movie, so don't worry, Sucker Punch. Your time is coming, and you will be absolutely punished for it. And speaking of superheroes that Zack Snyder destroys, Superman the movie. But this isn't directed by Zack Snyder, this is directed by the great Richard Donner, of course. Yes, this movie has one of the ridiculous endings imaginable, of Superman basically reversing the entire orbit of the Earth, trying to revive Lois Lane after she died when he didn't make it in time. But as a Superman movie, this is the movie that made me got into the Superman character and made me love Superman ever since. I will definitely go get Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, whenever I get the chance, and I will avoid Man of Steel at all freaking costs, because I am not going to get next to that movie within a 10-foot pole. Next up is Surf's Up, an animated mockumentary that is directed by Chris Buck, who would later on to team up with Jennifer Lee to work on the movie Frozen. In the movie Taken, Liam Neeson has a particular set of skills, but a particular set of skills that will absolutely blow your mind when you see this very criminally underrated action movie. Are you talking to me? Are you talking to me? Because if you are talking to me, I have to tell you that Taxi Driver is yet another Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro masterpiece. Next up is a surprisingly hilarious movie made by the creator of Family Guy, Seth MacFarlane, Ted. Seriously, a movie about a grown man and his childhood friend and a talking teddy bear as they deal with life circumstances. That's something unheard of. Absolutely hilarious. Mark Wahlberg and Seth MacFarlane as the talking teddy bear. Fantastic chemistry. Next up we have Terminator 1, which is a great science fiction time traveling movie directed by James Cameron. And then preceding that we have the even better sequel in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. One of the best action movies that I have ever seen in my life. And in terms of action movies, T2 is so much better than Aliens. Just saying. And then after that we have Terminator Salvation. Now, this may be not one of the best Terminator movies out there, but if you had to make me choose between this movie or Terminator Rise of the Machines or Terminator Genesis or Terminator Dark Fate, I'm taking McGee's installment any freaking day of the week, despite the fact that this movie is known for having Christian Bale's infamous outbursts on set. Next up we have my second favorite horror movie of all time, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. When I saw this movie, I was so horrified. I feel like I was living in a nightmare that just could not end. Absolutely horrifying, and this movie has one of the best jump scares that I have ever seen in a horror movie ever. Stephen Hawking is my favorite scientist of all time, and the theory of everything just made me love him even more. And not only that, but this movie not only works as a biopic, but it also works as a well-written love story, especially between the great chemistry between Eddie Redmayne and Felicity Jones. Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood is absolutely phenomenal. If there is any reason to go see There Will Be Blood, it's the performance from Daniel Day-Lewis. One of the best performances of the 2000s. And just when you thought that John Carpenter could make another horror movie classic, he managed to do so a second time around with his remake of The Thing. An absolutely horrifying remake about a group of researchers who managed to find an alien-like substance that had been hidden for thousands and thousands of years. What makes this movie especially terrific, aside from the brilliant, badass performance from Kurt Russell as usual, is the fact that this movie's special effects, even from 1982 standards, still holds up to this very day. Especially when you get to see The Thing for the very first time. Absolutely horrifying, atmospheric. Go see John Carpenter's remake of The Thing. Total Recall, another Paul Verhoeven sci-fi action classic starring the great almighty Arnold Schwarzenegger. Next up, we have the extended cut of The Town, starring and directed by Ben Affleck. One of the best crime movies of the 2010s. Next up, we have the holy Pixar trilogy of the first three Toy Story movies. I love the first Toy Story movie. It always lives on as one of my favorite childhood films. Toy Story 2 is just as good as the first one, and Toy Story 3 is a great, satisfying conclusion to the Toy Story saga. Up until I made the fourth one, which is something that I do not own at the moment. Can you, imagine why? And yes, before you ask, I did give Toy Story 4 a 5 out of 5. That was only because I was way too kind and generous towards that movie, and the movie emotionally and nostalgically manipulated me without my critical thinking on. Now, these three Toy Story movies are not the United States released Blu-Rays. These are actually the UK released Blu-Rays that came with a trilogy bundle of Toy Story 1, 2, and 3, which I thought, since it was released in the United Kingdom, I was like, oh my god, please, I just hope that they are region-free, and turns out they are region-free, so I was pretty satisfied when I got these films. But yeah, these three movies is something that I have always lived with in my childhood, witnessing the iconic duo of Woody and Buzz Lightyear, voiced by Tom Hanks and Tim Allen. If these Toy Story movies never even existed, I don't think my childhood would ever be the same again. Next up, we have Michael Bay's Transformers. Now look, I really think that Michael Bay's Transformers is probably the second best Transformers movies out there. Now don't get me wrong, this movie has a whole lot of flaws, especially from stuff that we have seen from every single Michael Bay film, with its story, its characters, and its humor. But when it comes to its action sequences and special effects, the likes that we have never seen before, with these Autobots and Decepticons fighting each other over a long, strenuous war, this movie still has some entertaining values to it. It's just unfortunate that almost every single installment will become worse and worse and worse as time went on. If you want to see a very solid Transformers movie like Bumblebee, which was directed by Travis Knight, who did Kubo and the Two Strings, which was pretty good, then I recommend, to an extent, Michael Bay's Transformers. Next up, we have the Norwegian found footage mockumentary in Troll Hunter. One of my favorite found footage movies, and one of my favorite foreign films of the 2010s. Just the meticulous and effortless world building that this movie has in order to expand its mythology on the trolls is absolutely fascinating, while at the same time not trying to take itself way too seriously. And for a foreign found footage film, alliteration, this movie does have some impressive visual effects, especially when you get to that climax that has to do with that 200-foot tall troll. All I can say is, absolutely jaw-dropping. Tropic Thunder, one of the rare good Ben Stiller directed movies out there, as it parodies war films, the film production side of things. And who knew that in a movie like this, an actor like Robert Downey Jr. would get nominated for Best Supporting Actor just by portraying a parody of a method actor and in blackface, and nobody bats an eye about it. The Truman Show, another heartwarming Jim Carrey drama that is once again directed by Peter Weir of Dead Poets Society fame. And even though I still do not have good time, even though I wish I did, at least I got Uncut Gems made by the Safdie brothers. One of my favorite movies of 2019, and this movie, hands down, has one of the best performances, if not the best performance, from Adam Sandler. I'm telling you guys, if you put Adam Sandler in a serious role, like he did with Funny People or in Punch Drunk Love, he's extraordinary, and he works wonders with this character, and this movie proves that assessment in spades. If only he can just stop whatever he's doing over at Happy Madison and just go keep doing movies like this, he will gain much of his reputation back. This movie is extremely heart-stopping from the first frame all the way to the last. And you know what? Who knew that Kevin Garnett from the Celtics can act? Next up, we have Clint Eastwood's Best Picture winner in Unforgiven, one of the best westerns that he has ever been a part of. And then after that, we have Jordan Peele's Us. I remember liking this, in fact, really loving this movie from South by Southwest. And then as soon as I seen more reviews online and a lot more criticisms on the film, I have to admit, this movie does have its issues, especially when it comes to its world building and its setting. Is this movie horrifying and hilarious with a lot of tremendous performances, especially from Lupita Nyong'o? Yes, it absolutely does, but does it have its significant issues? Undoubtedly. The Usual Suspects, a phenomenal Bryan Singer mystery movie that really takes you by surprise and has an amazing twist at the end. And who is Kaiser Soze? I'll give you a hint. It's the one you least expect. Next up is a comic book movie produced by the Wachowski brothers, V for Vendetta. Remember the 5th of November. This movie was recommended to me by a ton of my YouTube friends. I haven't seen this movie yet, so that's why I picked it up, and I know that this is based on a graphic novel, but if there's anything I really know about V for Vendetta, is that Alan Moore, who created Watchmen, hated the concept of V for Vendetta, but you know what? Regardless of that claim, I'm still intrigued to watch this movie, and maybe if I see it, hopefully I can prove that assessment wrong against him. Okay, now this next one is technically a blind buy, mostly because I was such on a Frozen high back in the day, and I really wanted to support Kristen Bell, and I got Veronica Mars. This was based on a very popular television show that I have not watched yet. I don't know, I just kind of wanted to buy it and watch it out of pure curiosity, and for a person who has not seen a single episode of the television show, as a first-time viewer of the movie, it's pretty solid. WALL-E is one of the best Pixar movies ever made, aside from Up and the original Toy Story. And this movie also serves as a very well-written and beautifully told love story as well. I mean, who knew you can sympathize with a robot with very limited pieces of dialogue? Next up is a movie that I would classify as one of the most unjustly reviled films out there. That is Warcraft. Now, don't get me wrong, this movie is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I really found this to be an interesting and fascinating video game-based movie, specifically because Duncan Jones is not only such a huge fan of the MMO, but how he manages to create a great world in Azeroth and the visual effects, and how he makes this entire world feel believable to the viewer, as well as telling a very decent story out of it. And the reason why it is so unjustly reviled is that there are some critics out there who will say that this movie is this generation's Battlefield Earth and is worse than Battlefield Earth. That's right, one of the worst movies ever made, based on a book, based on a religion that is made up by L. Ron freaking Hubbard's Scientology, is better than this movie. That's how you know you cannot take certified critics seriously. But aside from Detective Pikachu and Mortal Kombat, one of my favorite video game movies out there, which doesn't say a whole lot because most video game movies kinda suck. Next up is Warrior, starring Tom Hardy and Joel Edgerton, one of my favorite movies of 2011, and this movie does a so much better job at not only being a great MMA movie, but a great drama that centers on the broken relationship between two brothers. By the end of this movie, if you do not shed a man tear, I don't know what to tell ya. Warriors, come out to play! And speaking of Alan Moore, I love the Watchmen graphic novel to death. And to be perfectly honest, I love the Watchmen movie nearly as much. And that's saying something coming from a guy who's not a huge fan of Zack Snyder's movies. Here's the thing, Zack Snyder can make a good movie if the script is not even written by him, and the adaptation was made by someone else, which is why 300 and Watchmen are such solid adaptations. However, whenever he makes an original story out of a comic book property like, say, Batman v Superman, Justice League, or even an original story all of its own, like Sucker Punch, he's one of the worst storytellers of all time. He's atrocious! But I will give credit for Zack Snyder for making this visually wonderful and incredibly well-written movie based on one of my favorite graphic novels, and Jackie Earle Haley as Rorschach, A+ casting. Don't throw your pitchforks and torches at me when I say that I have The Waterboy on Blu-ray, because I got this movie. I'm not even a huge fan of this movie, but I got this film as a white elephant gift, and I wanted to be nice, I wanted to be courteous, so I accepted the gift. But you know in that part from The Waterboy where Rob Schneider, who plays yet another racial stereotype, says, "Oh no, we suck again"? That should be the motto for every single Happy Madison movie that has ever been released. As a man of the post-apocalyptic genre, I bought this movie out of pure curiosity, and at the end of the day, Waterworld is a mess. But it is such a mesmerizing and spectacular mess, especially with all of the production nightmares that happened during the making of this movie, and even the fact that this is probably one of the biggest box office bombs of all time. But I mostly bought this movie out of pure curiosity, mostly because I love the post-apocalyptic genre, especially the Mad Max movies, but Mad Max, this movie is not. Next up is one of the best musicals of all time, West Side Story, directed by Robert Wise, who's also known for doing The Sound of Music. This is a phenomenal 1960s musical rendition of one of the greatest William Shakespeare stories ever told, Romeo and Juliet. And I also heard that Steven Spielberg is making a remake out of this movie, so hopefully the remake is just as good as the original. Who knows? It probably won't, but we'll see. As a young child who liked Maurice Sendak's book, Spike Jonze's Where the Wild Things Are is a criminally underrated adaptation. This is an excellent adaptation that still carries on the messages of growing up, maturity, and even the certain aspects and understandings of childhood and adulthood. And the practical effects for the wild things in the movie, absolutely artistic and creative as can be. I have a question for you, ladies and gentlemen. Were you rushing or were you dragging? Whiplash was one of my top 6 or top 5 favorite movies of the entire 2010s. Every single aspect of this movie, made by Damien Chazelle, especially from the brilliant performance from J.K. Simmons as Professor Fletcher, are absolutely mind-blowing. And this is also secretly one of the most inspirational movies of the decade because this really teaches people to go more than 100%, no matter how hard you try. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, no pun intended, is a 1970s childhood classic that is filled with pure imagination. And it's one that should be immortalized in history, especially with one of the most iconic performances in the 1970s, Gene Wilder as Willy Wonka himself, which, by the way, rest in peace, Mr. Wilder, rest in peace. What can I say about The Wolf of Wall Street? It's one of Martin Scorsese's best movies. Leonardo DiCaprio delivers his best performance as Jordan Belfort, as he also delivers one of the best speeches in all of movies. The movie displays the fascinating and extraordinary life of one Jordan Belfort as a young stockbroker who tries to make it big. It's outrageously hilarious with its dark comedy, well-paced even for a 3-hour-long movie. I mean, guys, this is The Wolf of Mother effing Wall Street. Buy it, watch it, rent it, love it, I don't really care. Just as long as you can get your hands on this thing, do whatever it takes. World War Z was, in my eyes, one of the biggest surprises of 2013, because a lot of people speculated this was going to be a trash fire beyond epic proportions. Not to mention that this movie gained a ton of notoriety, specifically because of the fact that this movie had to endure multitudinous production problems, one of which was having to literally rewrite the entire final act of the movie, one of which was written by Drew Goddard, who also worked on Cabin in the Woods last year, and one of the screenwriters who worked for the entire rewrite of the final act was in fact Drew Goddard, who also previously worked on Cabin in the Woods. I still maintain my optimism for this movie, and when I walked out of this movie, it ended up being quite better than I expected it would be. It's not a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination, but what a complete surprise, an excellent zombie movie. Wreck-It Ralph was one of the best Disney movies of the entire revival era. This movie does such a phenomenal job at making a very great story about a character who doesn't really want to feel like being the bad guy anymore and just wants to be a hero, all the while putting you into this video game world and throwing in Easter eggs like Mario, Sonic, Metal Gear, without having it seem forced. If you are a video game fan like I am, you're gonna have fun with this movie. Speaking of one of my most anticipated movies of 2013, one of them was You're Next. This movie premiered at South by Southwest of 2011, and when I saw the trailers for this movie, I was super excited to go see it. But despite me never getting a chance to go see this movie, I finally have this film on Blu-ray, and after the overabundance of praise upon positive reception that I've heard, time to find out. Then up next, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to nut up or shut up, because I got myself Zombieland. This was a very solid zombie movie for its time, but with its writing and its dialogue and its characters, especially with Tallahassee and Columbus, played by Woody Harrelson and Jesse Eisenberg, it was such a breath of fresh air in the zombie genre, while also delivering some very entertaining zombie sequences. But it's also such a shame, because 10 years later, we got the sequel to Zombieland, which was Zombieland Double Tap, and it was not good, even in the slightest. Remember when sequels back in the day actually tried to be better than the original? I miss those days. And now we finally come across to the last movies on my collection. And the reason why I picked them the best for last is because they're some of my favorite movies of all time. And what better way to present them than this? Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which started it all and introduced me to my favorite movie character of all time, Caesar, played by my favorite actor of all time, Andy Serkis, who also is known for playing Gollum and King Kong. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, which is an even better sequel, a 6 out of 5 movie if I've ever seen one. And of course, you have War for the Planet of the Apes, which is undeniably my favorite Planet of the Apes movie in the entire franchise. I've already made a review out of this movie, and if you haven't seen it, please go and check it out. It says everything that I can as to why this movie is such a magnificent masterpiece. And by the way, another thing about Rise of the Planet of the Apes, this movie has, in my opinion, hands down, the best scene in cinematic history. If you know what it is, you know what I'm talking about. I cannot express to you guys how flawless, peerless, groundbreaking, magnificent, and how extraordinary that these 3 movies are. Every single aspect of this movie I love to no freaking end. To the characters, to the writing, to the score, to the mind-blowing and groundbreaking special effects of the apes, to the cinematography and the storytelling. Almost all of those aspects are entirely perfect in this whole trilogy. And you know what? The way that I'm going off right now, I am extremely tempted to do like a film critique on each of these 3 movies just to prove how objectively phenomenal they are. If you have not seen this entire trilogy, you are sorely missing out on one of the best movie experiences and trilogies you will never forget. In my opinion, the best trilogy ever made, the best movies of the 2010s, and without question, bar none, the best movies I have ever seen in my entire life. And now that the entire single disc Blu-rays are out of the way, it's time for me to show you my collections and Steelbooks. And what better way to talk about the collection section than by starting off with my favorite franchise of all time, the Planet of the Apes movies. This is the Planet of the Apes Legacy Collection that contains all of the original Planet of the Apes movies, excluding the remake of Tim Burton. We don't need to talk about that movie. Now, even me, despite loving the Planet of the Apes movies, not every single one of these movies is perfect. Aside from the 1968 original starring Charlton Heston and Roddy McDowall, which is right up there with Rise, Dawn, and War as the best movies I've ever seen, beneath the Planet of the Apes is the definition of sequelitis, because nobody has been planning on doing a sequel for this, and then Beneath the Planet of the Apes came out, and it was not great, even in the slightest. And then you had Escape from the Planet of the Apes, and it was pretty underrated as far as I'm concerned. And then you had Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which was mediocre, but still gave birth to the holy badass that is Caesar. And then you had Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which was just abhorrent. If there are 2 reasons as to why you should see these movies, one of which is just to see the 1968 classic with some of the most revolutionary makeup, well-acted performances, and one of the best twists in cinematic history. And as for the other movies, out of pure curiosity. As a great detective once asked, do I feel lucky? Well, as a matter of fact, Detective Harry Callahan, I do feel lucky, because I own the entire collection of the Dirty Harry movies on Blu-ray. Starting off with the classic Dirty Harry movie, with Clint Eastwood portraying the badass himself, Magnum Force, The Enforcer, Sudden Impact, and finally, The Deadpool. The next collection I have is all 4 Lethal Weapon movies, all of which starring Mel Gibson and Danny Glover, all of which directed by Richard Donner, and the first 2 written by Shane Black. Then the next collection I have is the franchise that made me fall in love and made me want to study incredibly more about dinosaurs. The Jurassic Park collection. I'm not even kidding when I say this. This is the kind of franchise that made me want to study dinosaurs. From going to museums, looking at the skeletons, reading books upon encyclopedias, to even watching dinosaur documentaries, and even mindless bloodfests like Jurassic Fight Club on the History Channel. What the original Jurassic Park was known for, aside for its characters and its writing, is the fact that its visual effects are still mind-blowing even to this very day, with its mixture of practical and visual CGI effects. But then after that, the franchise went down a dark path, with The Lost World being completely laborious, Jurassic Park 3, which is straight up atrocious, and then after that you had Jurassic World, which was pretty okay, but still not great compared to its original predecessor. And it's especially sad for this franchise when Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, one of the biggest disappointments I've ever seen out of the entire decade, is still a movie that I do not physically own on Blu-ray. In my opinion, just watch the original Jurassic Park. As for the other movies, It's all up to you to decide. Then next up, we have the entire 6-movie collection of the Mission Impossible movies, aka the franchise that shows that Tom Cruise has bigger balls than us. But all jokes aside, Tom Cruise is the definition of a modern-day action star, as he proves it just by not only performing well, but by doing his own stunts, by climbing next to the Burj Khalifa, jumping on top of a building and breaking his leg and still keep on walking as the scene is going, to doing his own motorcycle chases, to riding a helicopter and skydiving. You have to give credit where it's due to someone like Tom Cruise for doing his own stunts. These movies are fun, they're action-packed, they're exhilarating, they're white-knuckled and heart-pumping in every single second. This is a great action movie franchise, with Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol and Mission Impossible Fallout being the best ones. Then after that, we have another holy trilogy. Yes, it's the original Star Wars movies. No, I do not own the prequels because I'm not entirely a huge fan of them, and I only own 1/3 of the entire sequel trilogy. And I regret that I ever did. But this was essentially my very first childhood blockbuster that I have ever seen, that was also introduced to me to my father. No, it's not Darth Vader. All 3 of these movies have a fantastic story with memorable characters such as Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, one of the best movie antagonists of all time, Han Solo, Princess Leia, Lando, Chewie, C-3PO, R2-D2, you name it, the list is endless. It's just unfortunate that the Disney sequels managed to ruin their entire reputation. Thanks, Rise of Skywalker and The Last Jedi. But these movies themselves were also the pioneers of the sci-fi summer blockbuster. Without these movies like this, Hollywood would never be the same again. As far as Star Wars movies are concerned, nothing is better than A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, which is the best one, and Return of the Jedi, which I think is one of my uncontested favorites. Then after that, we have another 6-movie collection, the Rocky Heavyweight Collection, featuring all 6 Rocky movies. With the first one winning Best Picture and giving Sylvester Stallone an Oscar, one of the most inspirational boxing and sports movies of all time, Rocky 2, which is an underrated sequel, Rocky 3, where Rocky Balboa faces up against Mr. T, loses, and makes his entire comeback, and who could forget the cult classic known as Rocky 4, where Rocky Balboa faces Ivan Drago during the Cold War. And to this day, out of this entire collection, I still not have seen Rocky Balboa or Rocky 5. Rocky 5 I heard was terrible, but Rocky Balboa I heard was pretty admirable to say the least, so I guess I'll have to give them a watch sometime soon. And the final 6-movie collection I had is one of those movies that opened the doors to how cinematic universes or franchises are supposed to be established. Yes, it's the Universal Classic Monsters Collection, featuring Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy, the Bride of Frankenstein, and the Invisible Man. I always have a heartfelt fondness for monster movies. I've always loved them ever since I was young, especially just learning about these monsters like Dracula, Frankenstein, werewolves, and even mummies. I 100% adore those kind of things, and these 1930s black and white monster movies prove that as such. And if you were to ask me what my favorite movie monster of all time is, probably out of this entire collection or in general, is without question Frankenstein. I love Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's one of my favorite books of all time, and just as a standalone monster movie alone, Frankenstein starring Boris Karloff as the iconic movie monster is one of my favorite black and white movies and one of my favorite movies of all time. These movies are absolutely glorious examples of monster movies, and sometimes later towards October, I might as well watch these movies during the Halloween month. So please pick these movies up if you're in for the Halloween mood. And finally, we come across the Steelbooks. I don't have a whole lot of Steelbooks, so luckily this section will be very shorter this time. Now what Steelbooks are usually collector's items of movies being put in these steel cases that display all sorts of creative and imaginative artwork, and they're mostly sold as collector's items. So without further delay, here are my Steelbooks. The very first Steelbook I have has to deal with one of my favorite movie monsters of all time. Yes, it's Frankenstein, but it's not the original. It's the guilty pleasure version of it, I, Frankenstein. And the reason why I wanted to pick this Steelbook up is mostly because I love the artwork in this Steelbook, because the poster for I, Frankenstein looks freaking fantastic. I mean, sure, I do kinda like the art style of the ink around Aaron Eckhart, that I, Frankenstein poster, but this poster for I, Frankenstein, I think is something that surpasses the original teaser posters. And also, do not be confused with the English wording, because this is the Dutch Steelbook of I, Frankenstein. This is a Region B steelbook copy of the movie, so I mostly bought it for the artwork and mostly because this movie, once again, is a freaking guilty pleasure. The next steelbook I have was given to me by my little brother. It's the limited edition steelbook of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I really like the art style of it. It's mainly the art style that I usually see from like a lot of these limited edition posters where they look like comic book stylized steelbooks, and I like this design, and hopefully I will get more like these in the future. Now next up we have another steelbook. This time it's a Disney steelbook. It's for the movie Frozen, and I really like this steelbook mostly because, well, not because Elsa's on the cover of it or anything like that, but mostly because I just really appreciate the art style of it. This steelbook was released in the United Kingdom with a region-free copy of Frozen in 3D. Once again, I really love this steelbook. I really love this artwork, and I think it's absolutely extraordinary. Funnily enough, this was a movie that I also got for Christmas, so talk about an awesome Christmas gift. And then finally, it all comes down to this. The final steelbook I have is the Best Buy exclusive steelbook of War for the Planet of the Apes. I really love this art style, especially with the Ray overlay and the, I think, black or bluish outline of Caesar. And this is the back side over here. Not all heroes are human. And yes, of course, I had to go get this steelbook because this is a part of my favorite franchise of all time, and anything with Caesar on it is always destined to make me happy. So yeah, how can I not buy this steelbook? And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that is it. That was my entire Blu-ray collection. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for watching my entire Blu-ray collection video. If you would like to see more of my content, be sure to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and if you have a phone, find me on Instagram. And as always, if you'd like to see more special videos like this, be sure to subscribe for more. Expect more videos down the line, and here's to another year of Blu-ray collecting. My name is Luke Nukem. And you, my friends, have been blown away.